What's up, YouTube? We are on episode 10 of the Troponin episodes. We're going to talk about everyone's favorite thing if you're a client of Justin's, the high carb days. We look forward to them because obviously there's more food, but also there's the free meal at the end of the day. We've talked in previous episodes on the even just verbal differentiator between a free meal and cheat meal, but we did have a couple of questions come through on the website regarding structure on the high days, and then Dave and I had a couple of questions as well that we were going to pick Justin's brain on. So one of the things that we talked about, and I'm sure that your clients ask you all the time, is does it matter if you have a high day before a check-in, or do you like to space out the high days with a certain number of days between them?
I actually don't like it before I check in, and for some reason, people always think that I'm the opposite. I mean, it's not the way you look. I mean, mostly the guys will think that because they look better, they look bigger after a high day. But especially in prep, I don't like that because one of the things we'll do that's not like a stand. So we'll do our standard. You send a update. I'll change your diet for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long. Yeah, you rarely go more than a month without doing some adjustment. But in a diet, you might do a check-in and we're pushing really hard and you're overly flat. And it's like, okay, we're gonna get too flat and start eating some muscle or slow your metabolism. So I'll do like a one-off change to a high day. It won't be an official change. It'll say on your next high day, add 150 grams of carbs spread out throughout the day. Well, if you had it the day before, you don't get to do that for 6 more days. So at that point, we're a whole nother week where we probably are negatively affecting things as far as your metabolism. So I don't, it's not like how you look, and I don't care how you look. And that sounds like I do. I mean, because that's what I'm tracking. But all I'm looking for is consistency. You're whether it's the day after a high day, the day before a high day, a medium day. I'm looking for consistent changes. I don't. It's not like an absolute. I need you to look a certain way. I'm comparing how you look. Compared to the last week. It's kind of like when people will do like a DEXA scan or an in-body scan, and they'll think I'll want that. It's like I don't care what your body fat is. I care how it looks. That's a good metric. We can see if your body fat is lowering on that. But if the in-body scan, because I had someone one time with striated glutes measure out at like 17% body fat on an in-body scan 2 weeks before show, and then in an app they were in a full-on panic. And I'm like, well, if part of the judging criteria is that you have to get an in-body and the number affects you, then that's bad. But if the criteria, which it is that you're shredded and striated glutes are a marker of that, then you're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Would you rather be fat and have the scan say 6%? Because I'm sure we could bribe the guy into changing the numbers on it. Or would you rather have striated glutes and have it say 17%? But however it reads, if it's wrong, it's usually consistently wrong. So we can track, the change. And that's what I'm doing. I don't care whether you look full or flat. I care that it's consistent, which is why I want the check-ins the same day each week. And most people are on a 7-day training program, and I think we had a question about this also. But that's the only time it really kind of differs is if you're on a training split that's not 7 days. You might check in on a low day and a medium day and a low day and a medium day, and that can throw things off. But yeah, I don't like the high day the day before check-in.
Do you, when it comes to spacing, and one thing we talked about before the podcast was spacing on a high day for someone like Dave, who can hold a lot more muscle glycogen than a smaller female like myself, who, I mean, we have to be a little bit more precise and things like that. When you think
Hmm.
about spacing out the days, even for some of your males who are maybe not 280 pounds, but are, like 180, 190 and want to get bigger, is there anything that you recommend with regards to structuring the week nutritionally?
Well, the thing is, if I'm doing my job correctly, I should have the high day to fill you out for the amount of glycogen you store. Like Dave's high day might be, I don't even remember what's that now, 950, probably 900, 850. It's
2,000.
pretty high, 1,000, even higher. So, but and Danny's, yours is not 1,000. So
Definitely not.
so if I'm good about it, I should have it roughly in proportion. Now, the thing that won't be proportion and the thing that can be scary to the client is that you're going to hold more water probably than Dave is going to. Even if we nail the glycogen and I'm only having both of you guys are replacing the exact amount of glycogen necessary to restore your glycogen levels on the high day, it's likely that you're going to bloat up more than Dave does from that same situation. And that can mess things up and make it, harder to gauge things. But as far as spreading them out, if I'm doing my job correctly, I should be able to uh, choose the right amount of extra carbs so that we don't need to spread your high days out more. Now it gets a little tricky I don't know that I've ever had a female on more than 2 high days in a week. Where I've had a lot of, most of the larger guys get up to 3 high days a week at their peak.
Yeah.
And so that's the one thing that's different.
Yeah, and I find that with, I mean, I train 5 days a week, which is I think about the limit if you really want to progress. Like I don't believe in training 6 days in a row, and I've got 3 high days now, and so like if you're training 5 days a week, it's probably going to be like it's like 2 on 1 off, 3 on 1 off, and if you want them to be non-consecutive, then basically those 3 on days, it's got to be high, medium, high, and then the other two
Hmm.
days have to be either medium, high, or high, medium.
Hmm. And that's why I rarely go more than 3 high days, because that's about, because I don't, 2 high days in a row, we'd have to change the high day. Because if you come, even if when you're really large, burning through calories like crazy, you might deplete enough after one day to need another high day. And like at your size right now, you do that, but you're not going to deplete enough because you're not depleting on a high day. So if we do a high day, it doesn't matter how hard you train, you're not depleted the next day. And so now we're adding a high day onto a glycogen saturated state, which is now it's just a fat storage state.
Yeah.
Right.
And for a smaller female, we're trying to coordinate, and I'll be transparent with the viewers too. Coming out of the show mentally, I was not in a great state, and so when I checked in with Justin, one of the things I said was, even if it means other days being lower calorie, if we could do 2 high days, so that Dave and I just have a night to like just be humans during the week. And so Justin made a couple changes on his end, and we'll check in this week. But for us to do that right now means I'm having high days within like 2 days of each other, like a Thursday and a Saturday.
Hmm.
And I think that for a smaller female, it's probably not as favorable as for a male.
But yeah, but we brought your carbs down a decent amount on the high days, right? I mean, your calories aren't.
Yeah, I think the carb is
So I think,
almost 100 grams, which is
yeah, yeah. And I debated giving you two different high days, like a high day one that you'd have on Thursday and a high day two that you'd have on Friday or Saturday, and they would vary because you're going to not be as depleted going into the Saturday high day, but you're going to be pretty depleted going into the Thursday high day. But I figured I'd be guessing at what those numbers were.
yeah,
So we just made them the same high day, and then which I prefer to do it this way. Then if we make that change, we're adjusting based on what we see, not what we're guessing is going to happen. I hate guessing at changes, and I think I think if there's one thing I think like coaches or nutritionists do that's the most common mistake is doing that. Is just
hmm.
you know it's like we it's probable that that's the best approach, or possible that that's a good approach, or an effective approach, but we don't know. We don't know if we need it, and if we do need it, we don't know if I'm giving you the right numbers.
Right.
But we'll see quickly, in a week or two, if your if your weight is shooting up, or you're holding a ton of extra water on Saturday. We'll know, okay, they're probably gaining fat from the carbs on Saturday, so let's bring the carbs a little lower on that high day and a little higher on the Thursday high
Yeah.
day.
How does so even if we move things around where I did like a Tuesday, Saturday, like how would, and I check in for people, I check in with Justin on Wednesdays. So I hate, all last off season I had 2 high days, and I hated having a high day right before check-in because I felt like I couldn't even enjoy the
Hmm.
free meal, which ended up actually kind of being a good thing because otherwise I'm a fat kid. Like you put food in front of me, I'm going to go. Um, unless I like just got off stage and then I have a rice cake with peanut butter and raisins on it, and Justin was like, "That's disgusting."
Is that what you ate?
That was the first thing I ate, yeah, because I was feeling pretty low mentally. Um,
Yeah, I probably felt even lower after that.
yeah, you're not wrong.
I
It's okay. Then I had my mac and cheese, so we're good. but but how do you account for something like the variance in the free meal? And we talked a little bit again for people who have not listened. We did talk about the difference between a free meal being something that you can enjoy being human versus how many sticks of butter can I eat an hour?
Yeah. And that's perfect. When you said, like, we want a day during the week to be human, that's what the free meal is. The free meal isn't a trick. It's not like it doesn't hurt the diet if it's eaten correctly, because people aren't on point 100% anyways. Especially in the off season, there's slip ups, or someone goes to eat dinner with their friends or their family, or take their wife out or their husband out, and that's what the free meal is. It's not like some special thing where we try to gorge and see, can I drink a whole bottle of olive oil without puking? It's a chance to be a human, so that you can be a machine. You could be a Terminator the rest of the
Yeah.
week. And that's really what it is, you know. And in the off season, it's easier to do that because you're not as hungry on that cheat meal, and so it really does. Off seasons are usually easier. I usually don't even have to. I just say go and have a free meal for the last meal if you need it, because I know you're not starving. You're not even very hungry from the high day, so you're really just doing something. You know, eating a meal with your family. The diet and prep, it's harder because,
Yeah.
and it's almost like a culture where people turn it into like a contest. Like, oh, it's a free meal, you know. That's and they plan it all week, and it's like they just want to see how much food they can get down, and it's hard not to because you're so hungry, you
It's
know.
so
And
funny.
eating,
Go ahead, sorry.
well, eating until that's what it's for, is to get that out of your system, get the cravings out. And if you're not on track, we will pull that back. I'll put a limit, a 2,000 calorie, 1,500 calorie limit. But when you're really eating because you're that hungry, that's fine. It's when people like go and see like a local restaurant has can you eat this 17,000 calorie
The
burger?
pizza
You know,
challenge.
that's not,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not the point of the high day, because then you're eating past when you're even full, to eating to see if you can do it, and that's not helping
Yeah.
things.
It's funny during prep, just like how people deal with food, because Dave will get on Instagram or social media and like he'll scroll through food starting like Sunday for hard days on Saturday. And I'm like, if I start doing that, I literally cannot think about anything else. And so he'll go through the week, and like throughout the week, his like anticipation or excitement about the cheat meal will be like, I mean, he's a phenomenal cook anyway, but he'll go the extra mile on like 16 different things. And like it'll be Friday afternoon. He'll be like, "Oh, great! I'm gonna do this for the cheat. I'm gonna make all these different, things." And I'm like, "Bro, I gotta wait till I at least have my like normal sized bowl of oatmeal in the morning before I even think about food."
I like to look forward to things. It doesn't make the diet any harder.
Oh, I think it does.
I think,
I'm
well,
sure it does.
I am not a good cook, and we don't have a lot of good restaurants by us. And so I learned that there's no lower low than being hyper excited about the cheat meal and having the cheat meal be
Oh
terrible.
man,
That ruin that just wrecks your week.
we uh we won't go out to eat for our cheat meals anymore because pretty much everything we make at home, except for like Asian food or sushi, is better when we make it at home. But after pretty much every show I've done, my cheats have been very like, except for this year. But last year at Universe, we got off stage. By the time we left the
Well,
venue,
nothing was open. Yeah.
it was midnight. So the only thing that was open was like a Dunkin' Donuts inside a 7-Eleven.
Dunkin' wasn't open. The employees there were making food for the next day, and they just gave you some.
I just made friends. I usually make friends and get a lot of free
They
things.
just for free. They handed her like a big box of donut holes.
Here, lady, you're scaring us.
Pretty much. Why are you the color of a Dorito? You
Yeah.
know. But yeah, there's nothing worse than just being really excited for a great meal and having it, if it's the
Hmm.
only thing you get during the week, be very
Yeah.
sad.
Oh
I
yeah.
I'm curious about this because I feel like a lot of the reason that cheat meals or free meals are like such a big deal and why so many people do them wrong is that a lot like it's like the norm in this country now to have kind of a disordered relationship with food one way or another.
That's a good
Yeah.
point.
And I'm wondering if you've seen differences. I mean, it's not just an America thing, it's probably kind of a first world thing, but I'm wondering if you've seen differences with clients in other countries where maybe it's a lot easier to tell them go have a free meal and they really will just go eat like a burger and fries and be done and have that be it.
Yeah, and and it's maybe not so much country to country, but if I think about it, I think it probably is, because I'm picturing a couple clients, but I can picture a couple American clients too who were raised, who just learn. See, what we do terrible in America is just let our bodies are will learn to just eat as much as they need. So like my wife's family is actually that way. That's what she's like. She was never taught to restrict food, or never like told she was going to get fat, or her family's all thin. Where like in America, it's either finish your plate, you have to finish everything on your plate, or your parents are overweight, and from like birth, you're taught that like you do one thing wrong, you're gonna gain weight, and so you never even learn to like let your appetite be your
Yeah.
gauge. So most of us have like no ability. It's actually remarkable to see people who do it. Who you go to like a nice restaurant, and they're 7/8 through their meal, and they're just not really, they're full, and they just, they're done. That's it. And where like, because they understand what full is. Where I don't. It's like
Hmm.
I know there's different stages of full. I know there's full where your stomach, you're not hungry anymore. I know there's full where your stomach starts hurting. I know there's full when it's very painful. And then I know there's full where it doesn't even taste good anymore, you know? And those are, but I don't know which is like, they don't mean anything to me other than, oh, this is happening, you know, because it
I think
like, I
yeah, I
never
think
like,
it was Louis C.K. who made a joke. He said, "The meal isn't over when I'm full. The meal is over when I hate myself."
yeah, yeah. But you will see like, I don't really get very many French clients. I've had maybe 8 or 10 ever, but it's interesting how they treat, well, and it might just be it's a small sample size, but it seems like they treat the free meal as, oh, great, I get to go hang out with friends
Mhm.
for an evening, and it's like a whole evening type thing, you know, with wine and like drinks and like, you know, a long drawn out meal where they're laughing and you know, where like most of the American clients, it's not. It's like it's almost like I don't want anyone around me, just food, you know, like I just want to bury myself in a diner. But
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you could. I mean, I'm sure a ton of people who watch this also watch like Fuad's podcasts, and you can see the differences here because like I resonate with Fuad a lot because he's like a fat kid, and he will just like he always talks about how much he loves food. He'll like have pretty bad binges, but then you have someone else like Ian Valier who pretty much just seems to have a winner's mindset about everything because people will ask him questions like, "Oh, like what cheat food are you looking forward to?" He's like, "I don't know, bro. I just eat. Like, why are you being so weird about this?"
yeah, and it's really like we're just terrible. Our culture of food is just is so bad because none of us even like we associate what's bad. We associate food as like a negative, you know, and we associate food with like a dopamine burst that feels good, but then we feel guilty because we shouldn't have enjoyed it. We're bad people for enjoying it, and just so terrible. And it stems from the fact that like you were either raised that you have to finish your plate, or you're raised that if you make one wrong decision, you're going to be fat, and no one knows how to gauge their hunger. No one knows if they're hungry or sad or just
Yeah.
thirsty, or but they know that if they are hungry, that they feel bad that they're hungry because somehow they're not supposed to be hungry because being hungry means you're going to eat too much and get fat. And it's just like it's just terrible the whole
Yeah,
culture
hunger signaling
in
is one of those
America.
things that I think a lot of like I have a kind of a network of female coaches who work with other gals, and one of the things that they all look at is actually like being in tune with your hunger signaling. So the whole like disordered eating concept and being hyper restrictive in a way, or those people who just really can't develop an okay relationship with a meal plan. These like intuitive eating coaches will have you go off hunger signaling, and I don't think I could do that. Like I don't think I would even know how to be
Mm-mm.
aware.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's I never
Yeah.
developed that. Never. I just
I actually feel like I could, but I really don't want to because I want to bodybuild. Like I want
Mm-hmm.
to, I want to do
yeah
something that's probably going to have me uncomfortable in one direction or the other. But
yeah. One way you could see how much of a difference it would make though because everyone could just think they know like if you're in the middle of the off season like a cheat meal doesn't have the same excitement. But if I say right now you can't have like you know you could have a burger and fries. It's not going to ruin anything. And it's like it's already off season. I could technically have one. You probably wouldn't even change my check-in picks for the week, you know. But the second prep starts and you know you
Yeah.
can't have one. Suddenly, you know, and we were just our whole culture around food is that no you can't you shouldn't have that that's bad
Yeah.
for you or you know that'll make you fat. But
It goes beyond just the scarcity mindset and the abundance mindset, and it's something much deeper.
oh yeah.
There's a deep root of almost moral failure or moral high ground within that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
One
Yeah,
other question that I wanted to chat with you about is the idea of cortisol. And
oh
I
yeah,
think that cortisol gets a really bad reputation, and a lot of people think they need like cortisol inhibitor. But the flip side of that is that if people don't have enough cortisol, they don't have that kind of get up and go and the drive to go do things at times
yeah,
too. Um, so just the different phases of.
yeah. And
Go ahead.
I was trying to make a joke, but yeah, so half the people would take a pre-workout to get the energy to go drive to pick up the cortisol inhibitors.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
So
so I mean, yeah,
what's
I
your
mean,
experience in looking at things like blood work? Like, when would you expect someone to have lower cortisol? There's certain symptoms you look at to differentiate someone who is truly needs some sort of an inhibitor versus, maybe not having enough, things like that.
you can almost. I don't have like any like metrics or markers, or you can tell. right away, like when someone, and it's almost, you can tell almost right away whether they're going to be a good athlete in the sport or not based on this. But like, I'll give you two people. The first person is like that hyperspastic, anxious, you know, like ADD, but not, but a different kind of thing where they're just worried about
Right.
everything and like, you know, overly stressing, and you know, it's everything gets them all worked up, and they're nervous that they're going to make, and that person probably needs a cortisol inhibitor. But the problem is that type of person is going to struggle to do well in the
Mhm.
sport anyways. But because then you look at someone like a Ronnie or a Cutler or Iris Kyle or and like Iris perfect because she's will outwork anyone in any room, but she's calm. You see her backstage, you know, at an Olympia, she'd be calm as can be. Or you look at like a Ruly Winkler, who's like, oh, you know, shows today, you know, are we competing today? You know, and those are the type of people who, whether it's, you know, it's, well, it's not conscious, it's just who they are. And those type of people aren't pumping out a ton of cortisol. And admittedly, I would say I am not even remotely close to a expert on it because uh, the sport almost weeds those people out. Where most of your
Mhm.
clients who stay in the sport long enough to be a long term client, it's like what's the word, self deciding or self
Yeah.
energizing, self
Self-limiting.
fulfilling
Yeah.
prophecy of
Also,
yeah.
I have zero data on this, but I would imagine that those kinds of people who are super high cortisol, super high strung, are not. They don't commonly even choose this endeavor to begin with. So like they won't even be weeded out. They just won't be the type of people who take on a love of training and really start to get into this in the first place. That's just a hunch.
I would wonder, and I was really curious about like post show if people tend to be a little bit lower cortisol, especially if they've been, you know, running nonstop. They're on all the stims, thyroid's elevated, stuff like that.
That's interesting. You know, that's probably, yeah, now that you say that, that's probably a measurable amount, or a measurable part of why there's so much muscle growth
This
after
is
a
low
show.
cortisol.
The fact that all that, yeah, I would, yeah. I mean, I never really think about it, but I would bet that that probably is like a several
Well,
percentage
but isn't it the kind
impact.
of thing too where like not having enough can be detrimental as can almost be as detrimental as having too much. Like I would imagine there's a sweet spot to where you really want to be again kind of under the bell curve.
If you're like, you got to be someone who, if like you know, when people would describe their dog like a good dog, it's like, oh, when it's time to play, he'll play. When it's time to be lazy, he'll be lazy. It's, yeah, it's
Uh-huh.
like that. You know, like you need to be someone who, that fight or flight response needs to kick in when
Yeah.
it needs to kick in. You know, when you need to get fired up before a heavy set, you need to
Yeah.
be able to do that. But if it happens, you know, all day long, that's not good. Or when you can't control it or have no
I
ability to
guess,
decide it. But like I said, I'd be interested in your input because working with people with the way you do, you probably see it more because like I said, it's almost like self removed with my clients because most of my clients are competitors. Not all, you know, but at least 60% are competitors. And most people that compete in multiple shows are going to be people with that are low cortisol people probably, or like optimized
I guess
cortisol
there's a
people.
part of me that wonders like how much of an acute physiological change or even subacute physiological change there can be in baseline. Like last year, oh gosh, this is a whole different saga, but just some of my hormones got a little bit wonky last year. I came off oral birth control. I had Alicia Israel take a look at my lab work and just send her some pictures, and she was like, "I don't even have to look at your lab work. Your cortisol is tanked." And that was probably my first exposure to it. But it was also right after a very long. It was a 20-week prep, 18 or 20-week prep for Universe. I had a really stressful job at the time. There were a lot of things that probably could have, if we think about like the precursors to cortisol, even on the hormonal standpoint, and some of the chemical standpoint. I'd have to go through and look at like that whole pathway and axis, but I'd be interested in how some of those precursors can possibly be depleted, and you can end up with either an acute or subacute depletion, and have it be interpreted as, oh, she has too much cortisol. Let's get her on a cortisol inhibitor, and have it kind of tank instead, or tank the wrong direction.
Yeah, yeah. this is might not even be entirely relevant, and I'm trying to remember the whole thing that I read, but I remember reading something in grad school one time, and they it was about cortisol, and they were kind of using an example of like the fight or flight, but they about like when a fight was
Huh.
going to happen, and they said like that like people who get really panicked about a fight and really stressed and their heart starts racing like crazy, they think that like like in the movie depiction of like like someone really knows how to fight, or they think people like that doesn't happen to them. They just stay calm. And they said that's not the case at all. I said there's the same things happen, but when it's happening like a high level athlete, all that's going on, and it's like time moves slow to them. Like they're all the processes are happening so fast for them that everything else seems like slow motion, and they're able to really think through things, almost like like when you fall and like you fall off a roof, and it feels like you fell for a minute because you have all these thought processes going
Or
on
you're
because
underneath
everything's
a
firing
super,
so
super
quickly.
heavy squat bar.
Where yeah, and it's like that squat, like it feels like it's a
Yeah.
3 minute process. Like you can think of you. It's like you have like whole stories in your mind that you're like self talking to yourself through the squat. Where the opposite, the people, and I don't remember enough about it to like what their explanation of it was. But the opposite would be the people who panic. It's the same thing. Everything's sped up, but it seems like the world is sped up,
Yeah.
and they're slowing down. Like everything's happening too fast, and it's like a whirlwind where like the same processes are happening, but the person who's harnessing it properly, it's like all those things are happening, but it seems like the rest of the
Yeah.
world slows down
I'm
in
really curious
response.
too. I should look into this. I should look to see if there's any sort of relationship between, again, people villainize cortisol, but I hope that anyone who's listening recognizes that we have it for a reason. We need it. It can be very, very beneficial. If we don't have enough of it, that's actually a bad thing. But I'd be really, really interested to look at pain perception, because again, pain science is very much a cycle of like, I want to come back to the nerve thing that you talked about earlier, and making sure that, like, if we think about different types of nerve fibers and conduction speed and even just concentration of neurotransmitters that are going to permit actual depolarization of the nerve, is there any change in sensitivity to that system in the presence or absence of sufficient cortisol? Um, I'd be,
There's,
I would
it
imagine. I
probably
mean, just
is.
again thinking about like what that breaks down to, because it's, I can't remember. I was talking with a friend earlier today, and I think there's a relationship between cortisol, DHEA, and serotonin. Does that sound right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm trying to think of the neurotransmitter relation. It's like right
Yeah,
there, but yeah, I think,
I'm gonna
yeah,
Google this later.
this is a good time. Hopefully, some of the listeners, hopefully get some good comments about it. Maybe there's like a neurotransmitter expert or something that can help us on that. But yeah, trying to think of that.
I'm definitely gonna go. I'm gonna have to look that up
Yeah,
real
and
quick.
it's probably related to like how they like the monoamine oxidase
Yeah,
stuff. It's probably linked to that somehow, and how quickly the neurotransmitters are. Because if you inhibit the monoamine oxidase, then less of the neurotransmitters have a
right.
higher impact. It's probably something like that, I would think.
Well, I'll look into that. I'll make it some sort of an article about pain science and put it up on the Team Troponin website so that people who subscribe can get
Awesome.
more info on that.
There we go. You want to do
Perfect.
a periodization question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is
Oh
something
yeah,
that
good
somebody
one.
asked on YouTube, and I think I'm going to take the question a little bit more broadly than they asked it, just for sake of the audience. But their question was, do you think that you need to periodize your training to achieve like basically full muscular development and really look like a bodybuilder, starting with something more strength and progressive overload focused, like your classic push pull legs program, low, moderate volume, higher frequency, and then periodize or transition into something more like a body part split or a bro split, where it's maybe higher volume, or at least higher volume per muscle per session. Um, and I think I might fall somewhere in the middle of you two on this, but there's kind of two directions you can take the question. Is one, to what degree does somebody training for hypertrophy, a bodybuilder, need to periodize their training throughout any given year? And then to what degree are they going to periodize over the course of their entire career? And to me, I would think over the course of your career, your training will have to evolve, but I wouldn't even really look at that as periodization. I think that's kind of a bit of a bastardization of that term and taking it further than what it really is supposed to mean. But I guess to answer this guy's question directly, I would say, yeah, you're probably going to see that kind of progression. And this is something like Jordan Peters talks about this all the time, how when you're a beginner, you're really weak, your threshold for the stimulus that you require to grow is lower, and you're not going to exhaust yourself so much with every movement and every set that you do. So you could start off with something like full body or upper lower and progress that really well until you get to a point you can't. And then you could go to something more like a push-pull leg split and progress that for a long time until you can't. But eventually you're going to get to a point where you're too strong to do that high of a workload in any one session, and you're advanced enough that you need a much larger and more directed stimulus on any given muscle to grow it effectively, especially your weaker muscles. You know, and you see this all the time with like the guys who are PPL acolytes, maybe to their detriment, they end up with probably good, say, legs and torsos, but terrible shoulders and arms. Or maybe they have great delts because those take over everything, but terrible chests because they resist having a chest day for whatever reason. So in that regard, I would say, yeah, your training will evolve. Now, as far as periodization over the course of a year, and like, do you need to transition from this phase to that phase as a bodybuilder? I lean towards no. Certainly, for myself, having really good recovery abilities, I would say like I almost never, like I hardly ever deload. When I do, it's like I feel trashed. I'll have a couple lighter weeks, but I know that's doesn't work that way for everyone. So, what's your take?
I want to hear Justin's first.
Well, I think it's one of those things where like I'm gonna talk about it, and then the people in the comments are gonna be their definition of periodization is gonna be totally different, and they're gonna
Yeah.
disagree with me because of it. When I think periodization, I think like you have a performance date where your performance has to be maximized, whether it's a date or a period of time, whether it's like a sports season or a powerlifting meet. There's a section of time where you have to be optimized. Your performance has to be peaked. And in that case, you periodize your training to make sure that your performance is maximized in that time frame. That doesn't happen in bodybuilding because it's not a performance sport. Your appearance has to be maximized. And so that periodization is the diet. And that is absolutely what you do with the diet. It's periodization to peak the way your physique looks on a competition day. But the training isn't that. And so I don't really think you need to. And that's with my definition of periodization. I do think there's like I agree with David on the push pull legs thing. So I think like when your calorie surplus is highest and you're able to put the most workload into training without depleting yourself, something like PPL is probably most optimal because your calorie surplus is highest. Your ability to add the most amount of new synthesize the most amount of new protein structures on muscle is highest. And so you want to make sure that the largest muscles are getting the highest workload. But then I think something in like prep, I'm okay with people moving to like a bro split type thing because then in that case, the smaller muscles are getting a higher workload and the smaller muscles aren't going to be adding the large amount of protein structures. And like we talked about earlier, how you can actually synthesize new muscle when conditions are perfect, even in a calorie deficit. So there's some potential to actually build. You're not going to add noticeable back thickness in a contest prep, but you can add half an ounce of muscle to your arm and it's probably going to look like a bigger arm muscle, or an ounce of muscle to your shoulders and it's going to be a noticeable difference. So in something like that, I agree with. And then as far as like deloads and things like that, I don't plan those at all for myself. I do like what David does when my body needs it. But if I feel great and if I plan one every 6 weeks for some arbitrary reason, and on week 6 I feel the strongest I've ever felt and could be getting the best workouts I've ever had, why am I going to not do that, deload, and have terrible workouts when I'm not even peaking for anything like performance based? It's all
I would add too that
based.
if your goal really is hypertrophy, then the performance is more of a tool to achieve that. It's not the goal in and of itself. And so,
well said.
I mean, you talked about having a day where you're still feeling good. Why take a planned deload? I would go even further and say you could have a day where you're not feeling that great, but not feeling strong in the gym for a couple of days, I think, is pretty far removed from your body either being in a state or not being in a state chemically to synthesize new muscle. Because I mean, you could feel trashed mentally, you could be tired, but if it's like deep in the off season and calories are still sufficient, and you're taking a cycle, if you're doing that, like you could still have a banner day where you're synthesizing that max 1 gram per hour. So, and if that's the case,
Yeah.
I mean, why not still go into the gym and at least get the stimulus necessary to get that 1 gram per hour?
Yeah, and no one knows what that stimulus like threshold is either. It's so you could argue, it's going to be different for everyone. Like Lee Haney used to be stimulate, don't annihilate, and I would argue his
Yeah.
genetics allowed that. Someone with poor genetics probably does need to come closer to annihilation, at least in for a fewer number of sets. But yeah, you don't even know it, so you don't know if you're giving up growth even on a slightly reduced workload because you don't know if that's still enough to synthesize the tissue. So yeah, I mean I agree with David on that. I'm explaining it
I'm going to
poorly,
play
but
devil's advocate. I agree with you both for the most part, but I do think it's important to kind of take in point cases where periodization is important. Again, I work with a lot of people who are in pain, and I use training to basically I use their training and structure it in a way that it becomes their rehab. But even with my like hypertrophy clients or my powerlifting clients, when we think about hypertrophy, you always want to think about what bases you're laying or what scaffolding you're laying. And so I do think at times there can be an opportunity to where periodizing for either a bigger push or periodizing more of a little bit of a pullback phase can be really, really important, not just for 1 week, but to look at systemic fatigue all around, or even just looking at kind of, I hate to use the word like resensitizing, but maybe you want to shift focus on body parts, or maybe you want to shift focus on movements. Justin, I think at one point in one of our check-ins, you gave us the analogy of like you can have a plan for the year, but it's kind of like playing golf. Like you want your second shot to look a certain way, but it's going to depend on where your first shot lands. And I think that a lot of setting up a program can
mm,
be very similar to that, especially with regards to
Yeah.
deloads, to where, like I've got people who I know probably sometime within a 2 to 4 week period, or like within a span of like 2 to 4 weeks, they're going to need some sort of a fatigue reduction week that's not like a deload, but where we're reducing volume a little bit. But I'm not going to plan on which week that is until I hear from them. And most people who have been training for a little while are pretty good about knowing, like, hey, we're tapping the button. And if we don't pull back, I'm going to probably redline pretty quickly. But again, I think that depends on individuals' physiology, individuals' recoverability, individuals' like mental approach to training, where Dave can go in even on the days where he's beat and he's going to pull 725 for 15.
I haven't done that yet.
Not far off. But you take someone
yeah.
like me, and I just tend to be a little bit higher stress. I don't sleep well. I've got the autoimmune stuff going on, and I'll know 2 to 3 weeks before I need to, I have to pull back. So I think the big thing with periodization that people can probably take away is recognizing that there's no right or wrong, but you have to be, more than anything, you need to be able to actually be cognizant and aware of what your biofeedback is.
Yeah.
And again, recognizing
I
too,
kind of like what you.
if you're not setting your program up to include some overload and some technique, well, maybe not technique work, but some variation of overload plus metabolic work, at some point you're going to want to be able to include both components of that for both the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. If the bros want to come at us for that, great. But any of the metabolic work can be very, very useful, again, with regards to laying scaffolding, even just like doing things like increasing microvasculature, where if you're not laying that scaffolding somewhere, you're probably going to be prohibited with regards to how much size you can actually put on and how well you're actually going to be able to condition that area when you do start prep, because you're not going to have that groundwork laid. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and actually, now that you said that, I would kind of add a point to that. Is that, I mean, a lot of our audience, like people involved, in high level bodybuilding, are using PEDs, and one of the pitfalls there is that, like, taking drugs will make your muscles stronger pretty fast, especially if it's your first cycle or you're coming back after a layoff. I mean, shit, even if it's not your first cycle, like those strength gains can be pretty rapid, but so many other systems in your body, namely your connective tissues and your joints, do not adapt at the same rate. So I can see an argument for some form, like, I don't know if we're stretching the definition of the word periodization here, but I can definitely see an argument for some kind of plan to where you basically allow the other tissues to catch up to your muscles, and you only allow yourself to progress load, say that variable, so quickly. Because you might go I mean, it's like almost the opposite of what people think is a deload. Like a deload is like, I don't want to get overreached, so if I feel a little bad, I'm going to take a deload. This is more like, you feel awesome, but you don't want to push it as far as you feel like, as far as you feel like you could. And I mean, if you've been around this game for all, you've heard plenty of stories from people saying like, oh, I can't take, I can't take Anadrol because it makes me strong so fast, and then I tear my hamstring when I deadlift. It's like, well, there are ways to prevent that.
I think it might be worth even peeling off and truly defining periodization. And I think at its simplest form, it's having a purpose for a duration of time, and that doesn't have to be a set duration. But knowing the purpose of your microcycle. Microcycle is like your 1 week, or whether it's a 7-day or 10-day or whatever, before you start your next like repeat. I think you need to know the purpose of that, and you probably need to know the purpose of like the big picture, at least for now, kind of thing.
Yeah, I'd agree. Actually, go ahead.
One thing you said, Danny, earlier is that I hadn't really considered is I was kind of taking the view of the person, like the gas station ready, like someone who's always strong, not injured. So I guess like if you're someone who's injury prone or has additional things that you might, there, I can imagine cases where you need to consider that, okay, I'm not going to have the strength all the time, or this injury is going to pop up, or where you kind of have to plan it where periodize your training around when you'll feel, and that could even be like work related type things. I was kind of picturing it as the person, like who's trying to be a pro bodybuilder, where the training is the number one thing in their life, and they're relatively injury free, and there are no outside things that are preventing them from being
I
able
will
to
say
go
that the
full
times
bore
I've
every time.
flared up my injuries, I have my right adductor tendon tore off my pelvis and kind of scarred down somewhere in the adductor muscle belly, and then the right adductor longus and hamstring are kind of on their way out. My left adductor longus is also on its way out. The times those have been the most flared up are when I try to train like Dave, and I don't pull back when I need to, and I try to pace him. And when I don't pull back, it usually means I end up for like 6 or 8 weeks just sitting here like spinning my wheels. I'm like, man, I can't train legs, I can't do any core work, I can't take a deep breath without things hurting. And for most people, have some sort of like injury that they have to manage. How severe or how non-severe it is going to differ. But I've realized that I'm going to make the most progress in the long term if I plan on probably 8 weeks to go, especially if I'm really pushing my leg training. Probably that 8th week, I'm going to have to pull back my volume or intensity, one of the two, probably by about 30%.
That's really interesting. Looking back at my career, I was so lucky to. I mean, I had injuries, but I they were probably less than. It had to be less than like 1%, like 1 in 100 workouts where I had to adjust
Yeah.
my workout because of something. It was I just like we're very lucky in that it was. I mean, and the only times they really were torn muscles. It was never like a nagging injury. I never really had something that held me back. That I was very lucky in that. So I have kind of a warped view of that, and that for really over. I mean, I've been training since the '80s, but over that entire time, other than like I tore my pec, like both quads and my tricep rear delt, but even that wasn't like a bad one. That's the thing, because I was still. I remember, no, there was a little while I wasn't able to train, but other than those, where like there was something torn and I physically wasn't able to train, I never had like an injury that was like preventing something. It was always like, oh, if I can
I've really
close, then
wondered too how much
I'll
of
be able to
that
push.
happens. Like if we think about the people who haven't had like the big one versus people who have and like now always have to manage it. I always wonder like why that happens. I don't know if it's an exercise selection, if it's an intensity thing, if it's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. I mean, for me, it was really dumb training decisions because I was trying to keep up with someone else, not Dave, training for powerlifting, and not taking care of like, the analogy if you got that jar, right? And you can put the big pebbles in the jar, and that's going to take care of most of the things you need. And you put the smaller rocks in, and you fill in with the gravel. I
Yeah,
I
yeah,
had
yeah.
like, I had like a quarter of a cup of gravel, and I was missing the big rocks and the smaller pebbles that like needed to, to fill in.
I bet exercise selection has a lot to do with it, which is maybe why, like bodybuilding, I think has become a lot more accessible over the last couple decades to people who maybe don't have like the most amazing genetics for staying injury free, because rather than only having a handful of barbell exercises to choose from, which are not suitable to a lot of people's structures, you've got like going to the gym is trendy nowadays, and even very basic commercial gyms are very well equipped in some cases. So you can go to a gym full of options, and as long as some old washed up meathead hasn't put the idea in your head that you must do X, Y, Z to get big, then you've got a lot of choices available to you to where you can make great progress relatively unscathed. So, Brief rant though around the periodization topic. So I mean, deloads are only one part of this, but it's kind of a big part. Um, I think we've talked about how and when and why to deload, but I still hate the idea that a deload needs to be a week or more of completely non-productive training. I think that's so ridiculous. It's ridiculous enough in powerlifting because, like, I mean, I think this is maybe going by the wayside a bit. Between 5 and 10 years ago, everyone thought like every fourth or fifth week had to be this deload where you're literally putting like 50% on the bar and doing some speed reps and going home. I'm like,
losing acute neural acclimation.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
it's detrimental.
Yeah. It could.
I feel like it went through a like a crazy phase for a while where it was like 4, 5,
Right.
6 weeks like
Yeah.
automatic,
And
no matter how you
I
were
think
feeling.
that's bad enough for a sport like powerlifting. But at powerlifting, at least you could make the argument that it's a performance-based sport, and I'm organizing things to make sure that I can always perform as I need to on the days I need to. With bodybuilding, like we mentioned, I mean, there are so many chemical processes involved in hypertrophy, and I mean, I'm the worst culprit, or I'm the worst example of this. How I'll get it in my head that if I don't hit a tangible numeric PR this day, I'm not growing new muscle tissue, which is not true, right? And and so yeah, like any given day, you could not even feel that great and still at least train hard enough to achieve that threshold stimulus to gain just as well as you did any other day during your 10, 12, 20 week blast, whatever. So yeah, the idea that you would just take a non-productive week of training for bodybuilding when you already need every week of muscle growth you can get in this very long.
And you get so few of them. You get 4 months of the year you're not growing, you're in prep, and then if you're trying to stay healthy, you have another couple months where you're cruising or whatever, where growth isn't optimized, and so you got half the year to grow.
Yeah.
If you're gonna cut out 20% of that and
Well, it's
decide you're not
like
going to grow 20%, I mean,
good.
it's like it's like Elon Musk said about you don't have to be a good worker if you're willing to be a lot worker. Like if I'm willing to work 60 hours a week and you're only going to do 40, I can be 10% worse than you, and still in 5 years
Right.
I'll be so far ahead of you you'll never be able to catch up. And so yeah, I mean the days count, every
Right.
week
Yeah.
counts when you only have
That's why,
half the
like,
year to grow.
I've heard people say that they've walked into the gym, bodybuilders, they've walked into the gym, not felt great, and then just left. And in almost every case, it just seems so stupid. Like, I could walk into the gym and feel pretty bad, but I know that, like, I've got, we'll take a vacation at some point in the year. There'll be reasons why there'll be a week of training here or there that won't be optimal. So my general approach to a day where I feel like shit is still going to be, okay, what can I do to at least get to that threshold today?
Again, I'm going to play devil's advocate. Not everyone has a love for training year round. Like,
that's fair. And
sometimes there is that mental component of you walk into the gym and you're like, you know what? I really don't want to be here today. And the more I force this, I'm really not going to want to be here tomorrow and the day after. And at some point, it may be better to say, you know what? Not today, and come back tomorrow and actually have the hunger to train.
That's totally fair. And if that's the case, I think that'd be a good rationale. I just think it's silly when someone goes into the gym and they don't have any like mental background noise or any reason why they don't want to be there, but they think that they're doing themselves a service by just leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think our website, I think Tim Troponin actually has a couple of articles up on periodization and deloading too, with regard to not only the context of training, but with injury management, certain indicators that you probably do or don't need to deload, how to do so and not have it be a totally wasted week, because it can be a very productive week. But yeah, I think we have a bunch of that up on the site too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure we all have indicators to, like, you probably wake up in the morning within 20 minutes, realize, okay, it might not be the best day today. Like, grip strength's weak, coordination is off, doing basic habits.
Do you get that thing
For
where
other
you
reasons.
can't make a fist in the morning? I no, I never I never knew that was a thing though. People, I like I could hop out of bed and
Oh,
close
there
like
was.
a Captain's a
Go ahead.
Crush or something. But my wife, uh, my wife described that one time. She's like, like when you wake up in the morning, you like can't make a fist very strong, and I'm like, but then I've heard that's
Yeah.
like a common thing. Like people just can't.
That's
Squeeze their
one of the
fist
biggest
tightly in the morning.
indicators
It
of
just cracks
readiness,
me up.
actually, is grip strength.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, that's probably why you see so many drop deadlifts in meets,
Yeah.
even for people who don't drop them in training, because at the end of a long day where you've already done 6 max or near max attempts, you're.
Yes.
But
Oh yeah,
I'm remembering
yeah.
like some old T Nation article now where they were talking about this, and it was I think it was tied into this series where the TLDR of this was, well, you want to like mornings are for strength training and evenings are for hypertrophy training, but you also may not be strong on any given day, and they were even advocating use like one of those grip strength testing tools like that you might see in a physical therapy office. It's like if you get up in the morning and you can't hit some baseline on there, don't train that day.
That's
Yeah.
still a thing. Like,
See, the thing with that, I love talking about those things and like all the really hyper specific and but like what the people who worry about that are always no, almost all pretty much always the people who shouldn't be, you know. And it's true because there's like 99.9% of your progress in this sport is going to be, are you eating the right foods day in and day out, and are you training good, training hard? You know, like it's fun to worry about like the perfect routine or when to back off, and but if you're if you put 15 years of eating meat and rice and hard workouts with progressive overload and or whatever your metrics are for tracking progress, and you're in the gym, you know, tracking consistent progress and eating the right foods for 15 years, you're
Right.
not,
the
these
gravel, like
1%
the
things don't
rock.
matter, you know? It's like that, and that, yeah, yeah. It's, and that's, it, you know, and that you can look, find me a top, find me a Hall of Fame competitor who, who even
Yeah.
knows these things exist, really, you know? I mean, you know, you'll find lots of low level competitors who, and you could argue that the low level competitors have to worry about these things because they don't have the genetics, and that's probably true. But yeah, I agree with David on that. But yeah, I mean, it's that the sport is, you know, like doing the being like I think we did an article. There might be an article on Troponin, one of the early ones. I know I wrote it. I can't remember if I posted, but it was like it's in this sport. You want to be. It's better to be 90% good 100% of the time than being 100% perfect only 90% of the time. Because it's those, you know, like you could do everything super perfect and down to the final detail, but then 10% of the time you just fuck off, don't even go to the gym, and then you're not going to progress. Or you could be like, I did like I wasn't perfect. Yeah, I mean, I ate 6 meals of meat and rice, and you know, and I probably could have designed my workout better, but I was just getting so freaking strong on deadlifts, I just ran with it. Do that 100% of the time. That's only 90%
For sure.
perfect.
Yeah.
You're gonna
I think
fly past the
part
other
of the problem
person.
with all these little minutia too is they're just like they're established in a context that really isn't relevant to almost anybody because like if we're talking about actual literature, actual research, the research has to get funding. Funding doesn't go to bodybuilding. It doesn't go to making already huge guys using PEDs and eating 6,000 calories even huger. It goes to like I mean, the test subjects are bad enough. I think
Yeah.
like testing on unmotivated undergrads is bad, but like the hopeful end result of the research is like that it benefits some Olympic team or some collegiate team,
Or
some
medical application.
yeah, or medical, like so like
Yeah.
something that actually is worth investing the money in the research in the first place. And so we're already operating on like in a context that may be totally irrelevant to people who yeah, it's like that one, like the 1%, like the grip strength thing. Maybe that applies to some team of athletes who are like living and breathing training because they're paid to do so. But yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, that might be relevant to Usain
yeah,
Bolt trying to set an Olympic record in the 100-meter dash, but you just have to go in and train delts today, you know, or you just need to get through a chest workout. It's probably, you know, like if your grip strength is down 3%, you can probably
probably
still
yeah.
get a decent push workout in.
My delt caps can't grow if I couldn't grip the Captains of Crush #3 this morning.
If you could only,
Yeah, well, I told you,
Don't
don't
bother.
even
yeah,
bother
if
trying,
you
don't even
forgot,
bother going to the
may
gym.
as well just go home.
Your grip
Yeah,
strength is down.
well, I spilled my intro the other day at the gym. I was like,
Yeah,
fuck it, I'm leaving.
That was funny. That was something that came up when we were at Elite, wasn't it? Forgot
yeah,
the intro. We'll just go home.
yeah. It's yeah. Yeah, well, like, yeah, plus I'm hungover.
Yeah.
It's like, well, no, the hungover is part's the reason you should go. But it's always like someone, you know, like, they're always like, I forgot my intro. Should I even work out? Like, well, like, what did you eat last night? Oh, no, it's terrible. I forgot. I mean, got some pizza after I was drinking with my buddies, but It's like
Yeah.
your interest not going to be the difference maker here. It's pizza and beer. That's
You good?